Welcome to Pleasure Playbook, the podcast. I'm Jenna Miller.
And I'm Steph Morris. We are two sex and intimacy coaches coming together to talk to you about all things love, sex, and relationships with a she comes first attitude.
Each episode combines empowerment and education from a trauma-informed perspective, offering answers to your burning questions in an entertaining and enlightening way.
Join us each week for a tantalizing mix of sexy insights and empowering knowledge on how to live a spicier and more delicious life.
So let's dive into this week's Pleasure Playbook. Welcome back to Pleasure Playbook, babes. We are so excited to be here with you today. Today, we are getting into a fun and playful topic of sex myths. Sex myths may come into your life either by watching media or consuming content and believing that sex is one way. But here today, two sex coaches are going to sit down and talk about the most common sex myths that come up in our practice and in our social circles. And this hopefully can bring some awareness to your body and to some things that you're experiencing, or maybe your friends are talking about experiencing, and just give you the proper information so you feel confident heading into sex and intimacy with your lovers.
Sex is a very misunderstood and we're very uneducated around the topic of sex. So we want to bust some of those myths, things that maybe you think are fact, and we are here to tell you that they are not. And it is a much more complex and nuanced topic for humans, and it's not always going to be the same. So we have 5 sex myths to bust. We're going to give you some facts, we're going to give you some knowledge, some insights, and some little tips as well, things that you can take away so you can feel more connected, more empowered, and educated around sex. So let's dive into myth number 1 of 5, and that is that libido is always the same. This myth is that you have a certain type of libido, high or low, and you will always feel that same way. First thing to talk about is that libido is very subjective. What does a high libido even mean? What does a low libido even mean? There is no scientific studies done that can put you in a category of high or low libido. So that's the first thing in itself. What does it even mean to you? What does a high libido mean for you? And what does a low one mean for you? How does that feel? How much do you believe that you will desire sex in each category? That's great to get awareness around. And also, it's such a complex topic. There are so many reasons and seasons and things that can arise in someone's life that are going to affect their libido, and know that we have ebbs and flows in life when it comes to your sexual desire.
Yeah, and I think the concept of libido can be a bit confusing for folks too, because you may believe it's this thing that you have no control over. It's like your hormones, it's this thermometer within you that is fixed. And the fact of the matter is that libido is something that you can support and nurture and like stroke that fire to be more supportive to your goals in sex and intimacy. And it's not this thing that you have no control over. Yes, there are definitely hormone cycles and things that can cause your libido to change, medications that can cause your libido to be different. And when we're talking libido here, we're talking about your sexual desire, your desire for sex. And there are a lot of things that people slap on as libido when it's actually, in fact, not libido. Libido is such a juicy, meaty topic, and we're literally just scratching the surface here today. But knowing that it's not all this like switchboard outside of yourself that you can't access is the point we want to get across.
Let's just briefly touch on some of the reasons to get you a little bit curious about potentially some influences around libido. I'll speak for myself. I was on birth control on the pill for 12 years. That massively impacted my libido. So that is known to have an effect on women's libido. For me as well, disconnection from my sexuality and disconnection from my body was massively impacting my almost non-existent libido and responsive desire type as well. Other things, stress, if you're not getting enough sleep, if you're dehydrated, things like hormonal imbalances as well, or hormonal shifts, and also your mental health and your relationship. So, your connection with your partner, the trust levels that you have, the emotional safety that you feel, if you notice there's any resentment in the relationship, all of these things, they can be really subtle and even not, you not even have, you could not have conscious awareness of them. Those can in fact affect your libido as well.
Yeah. And I think giving yourself the grace to flow with your cycles or with the seasons of life or your stress response and what you're living through in the present moment, and finding other ways to cultivate intimacy when maybe your sexual interest is a bit lower, still finding time to nurture your relationships that are important to you in that season.
Yeah, totally. So, invitation for you is to have some compassion for yourself and open some dialogue with your friends or with your partner around libido. What does it mean to you? What does it mean to your partner? Especially if you're in a long term relationship, you want to have these conversations and get clear, what does a high, what does a low mean? What is the ideal amount that you're having sex, the quality that you're having sex, which one is most important to you? These are all really important and really powerful conversations to be having with people in your life.
Mhm.
Myth number two is that wetness equals arousal. This is a big one. And we know that men love to talk about a woman's wetness. And misconception is that means that she is aroused, that she's really turned on, and they're not one in the same. They're actually two different things, and they're not always necessarily directly linked.
Yeah. And it can feel really frustrating when when you're maybe feeling arousal in your body and you're not experiencing that wetness. And there's also a ton of hormone reasons why that might not be happening inside your body biologically. So, yeah, it's giving yourself the spaciousness to one, know that this is normal and that this can happen. And two, that there are tools that you can use like lubes and pacing and giving yourself more space and suppositories and different options for you to use to support yourself in this area.
Totally. And also why conversation and communication are really important with your partner so that they aren't taking your wetness as a sign that you're ready. They need to have that conversation with you so that you can communicate, really check in with your body. You might be really wet and not really be feeling it. And that's just a response that your body is having. Communication is sexy, communication is what we encourage. And again, have that compassion for yourself and seek support and external pieces that you can weave into your play and intimacy.
Yeah, so this can go both ways. You can be aroused and dry, or you can be not aroused and wet. And that is just the fact of life. So allowing yourself to explore it, allowing yourself to know that this is okay, and go from there. Hey, ladies, what if I told you you could take your pleasure game to a whole new level whilst giving your man a blowjob? We're inviting you to join our exclusive workshop, Sacred Praise, the art of pleasure worship, where you'll unlock the art of giving a really good, juicy blowjob.
In this intimate, women only workshop, we will explore the physical and energetic practices of cock worship, focusing on connection, sensual mastery, and on heightening your pleasure. We'll dive deep into guided techniques, mindset shifts, and even the sacred art of blowjobs, transforming it from a simple act into a ritual of devotion and intimacy.
This is all about owning your sensual power, embracing your role as a pleasure priestess, and having fun in the process. Join us for this transformative experience and unlock the kind of intimacy that deepens connection and makes both of you feel incredible.
Save your spot for the workshop now by heading to the show notes to get all of the details or send us a DM with the word praise at our Instagram, pleasure_playbook. Yeah. Myth number three, desire works the same for everyone. So the myth is that everyone has the same type of sexual desire. Definitely not true. There are different desire types that we have. The two main desire types we have are that responsive versus spontaneous. And it's very common to have two people in relationship who have different desire types. And that doesn't mean that the relationship isn't going to work at all. It just means it's really important to understand your desire type and your partner's desire type and figure out ways that work for you both in intimacy and find that compromise, that middle ground that is going to be a good place for you both to meet when it comes to your sex and your intimacy.
Yeah. And when there is incongruence, like when one of you has one type of desire and the other has the other, a lot of women can make themselves wrong for the way that they're responding to desire or experiencing desire. Either if it is spontaneous and you find yourself in more like random bouts of horniness and you're just like, oh, I don't know why I'm like this because my partner is a much different way of responding to sex, or the opposite. And just because maybe you're in a monogamous relationship and you're having sex with one person and you're not responding the same way that they are to desire, doesn't mean that you are wrong by any means.
Totally. So just to reiterate that spontaneous desire is where the desire suddenly out of nowhere is arising in the body. You feel that desire to have sex, get intimate. Responsive is more where the desire builds in response to that stimulation or to feeling connected and other factors like that. So maybe you need to feel that touch and feel a little bit of connection before your body is feeling warmed up and before you're then feeling the desire to continue with intimacy. And getting to know what your desire type is going to be really important. It's going to help you understand one another. And one thing to note that, especially for women, as we grow older and go through menopause, it's very common for women to live from a purely responsive desire type once you've gone through menopause and had different hormonal changes. So having that awareness as well is just great to have more understanding and compassion for yourself. That truly, as women, I believe that we go through so many seasons in life. We have our seasons through the year and our cycles, and we have these very distinct seasons and different archetypes that we're embodying through the different phases of life. And the invitation for us is that we get to be reborn in each season and get to discover ourselves in a whole new way. And yes, we could see that as a negative, yet actually, what a beautiful journey that we get to go on and become this next version of ourselves every time and rediscover who we are and yeah, explore and get to know ourselves on a deeper level every season that we enter. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah. One other big theme that's really popular for women with responsive desire is building that emotional connection or emotional intimacy prior to physical intimacy. So if you're someone who gets that bristle reaction or that ick from your partner who's just like grabbing your bum or your boobs and wants to have sex with you, it could be something to explore to try and build a touch base, a connection, an emotional connection, some type of conversation or some way of connecting with each other before physically connecting.
So true. And it's interesting as well that this can also shift and ebb and flow as we are growing and evolving. So I'll share myself. I used to have a very responsive desire type, and with my previous partners, would need to feel that connection and feel that touch and that intimacy before feeling any type of desire. It was much more responsive. And now, in a different season of life, I'm in a very different phase of life. I have a much more spontaneous desire, which is really interesting to be in now. But I'm also open that as I go through into a next season, that might change and that might ebb and flow. And that's okay as well. So just know that we are always changing and growing and evolving, especially as feminine beings.
Yeah, I think it's curious too to explore the fact that in long-term relationships versus shorter. I think that long-term relationships, spontaneous desire just naturally with hormones does taper off
Yeah.
and it becomes different, which we're going to talk about.
Totally. So, myth number 4, this leads us into sex should be spontaneous and fun. So, people, I hear this all the time that sex with the right person should just happen naturally. It shouldn't need any planning. You should just feel it. You should just be able to go for it, and it should be effortless.
That's what Hallmark or movies or TV shows make us think, right? And if you think about trying to condense a storyline into a 30-minute episode or an hour and a half movie, like obviously they have to accelerate that storyline. And so you often see just people in the peaks of pleasure and you're like, how did they get there from the front door unlocking to now they're like raw fucking in the living room. But obviously, in real life sex, there is so much more spaciousness that we need in order to get warmed up, to get interested, to get open to sex. And it's often not just this snap of a finger. We are here. We are aroused. We are fucking.
No. Scheduling sex can be really sexy. I'm just going to put it out there. I think that it's fun to play with both. Though, if you notice that in your dynamic, that sex is something that comes last, it's one of the first things to drop off often in relationship. You're busy, you're tired, you're stressed. Finding that time to get into the body and to connect and to feel pleasure and intimacy and connection, it can be challenging in these fast-paced, busy lives where we're wearing multiple hats. So if you're noticing that and you're going longer than you would ideally like to in having sex with your partner, then why not try planning? And it doesn't have to be this like scheduled thing. We're not saying you have to be like, it has to be at this time on this day, and we're going to do this position, and then we're going to do that. We're not saying there's a prescription for it, though creating a container of let's schedule this time aside and let's go into the bedroom and let's just see what happens. But we're going to have this time to dedicate to each other, to be present, to have set the scene. That can create more space for really creating the environment that you desire. I think in one of our previous episodes, Jenna was talking about having sex before going out for dinner. That can be another great thing. You could put it in there. Let's have an extra hour before going out for dinner to get intimate. Maybe that's just making out and fondling and touching each other. It doesn't have to be penetrative sex, but just allow yourself to have fun with planning, because that gets you to think about it, and that can start to warm up the body, and that can start to get you really turned on and fantasize about what you want to explore with your partner.
Yeah, if you're able to carve out that time for yourselves, even if it's just intimacy, whatever that looks like to you two, or multiple people if you're in more of a dynamic with multiple people. But if it's intimacy, having some conversation cards or giving each other a massage or a foot rub, it doesn't have to be like sex how you typically always have it, but just having that little carve of time for yourselves to explore. I did see this one educator talking about scheduling sex, and she was saying that with spontaneous desire, it can be really exciting to have on the calendar a sex date or like a time for intimacy. And then with responsive sex drives, you can feel a bit more anxiety or trepidation about the date approaching and like having to perform or having to be on. So I think this idea of just setting aside time for connection is really helpful, and that you can make the agreements within that connection then of what that's going to look like for your relationship.
Mhm. That's why I think the communication is such an important part for every dynamic, because if it's going to cause you more anxiety, of course it defeats the purpose. And I think there's
Yeah.
so much conditioning that we have that, oh, we have that time. That means that I have to show up, I have to perform. He's going to expect X, Y, and Z. And when we can start to have the communication of what would feel best to me, maybe it's a foot rub that day, and creating that intimacy and connection in that way, that's so beautiful when we can really shift away from this performative way of being in sex and find that embodiment. So it all comes back to communication. It's truly the most essential part of relationships, and definitely of sex, to increase your pleasure and connection and intimacy with yourself and with your partner.
Communication is lubrication, baby.
Oh, it is.
Our
Uh,
final myth.
Number 5 is that men want sex more than women. It's often assumed, it is often assumed that men have a higher libido and want sex more frequently than women, and not necessarily true. Desire types, as we have discussed, vary widely among individuals, regardless of gender. So, this is not always true. And I have worked with many women, especially in the work that we do, where women are really reclaiming their sexuality, that can unleash this whole feminine essence of empowered sexuality and desire that can potentially sometimes be more than a man if you're in a relationship with a man. So let's not live in this narrative of men want it more than sex, because it's not really a helpful narrative and can also be laced in a little bit of shame for women who do want it more. It's not
Yeah.
true.
I talk to a lot of my friends and obviously do this for work and talk to people about their sex lives. And it's equal the amount of women who want it more than their partner and women who want it less than their partner. So, yeah, it's really common.
Yeah. I think there's also that conditioning for men as well that men should want it more. So there can be a lot of shame for men if they're desiring it less. So there's communication that's required. Most important thing is getting clear on what does a healthy sex life feel like to me, and chat with your partner and make sure you're on the same page. And having regular check-ins is really great as well, because as we go through the seasons, I am such a big fan of living my life in seasons. And when I was in relationship, I would have conversations with my partner of, hey, I'm going into this season, and sometimes that's more of a business focus season. So I communicate, like, hey, I'm not really going to be contributing as much to cleaning, to cooking. I'd say phrase it a little bit differently, but how can we create support so that you feel supported, so that I'm not slacking, but knowing that I am going to be focusing a little bit more on my business over the next few months. So maybe we need to be a bit more intentional about intimacy and sex. These conversations are very important so that you're not just suddenly looking at the relationship like, wait a second, we haven't had sex in 2 months. If you've had the conversation ahead of time and you know that this is just a season, that's okay. That's going to happen occasionally, perhaps in a relationship, and it doesn't have to mean anything. And there doesn't have to be any shame around that. We ebb and we flow as humans.
Yeah. The other thing that's helpful is just talking to your partner about how many times a week would feel satiating or how many times a month or how many times a year. If you both feel satisfied by the frequency and you've come to an agreement of what would feel good for you to flow with, then you know, right? There's a lot of folks who don't actually talk about sex at all and they just have it and then they never have the conversation of what did you like, what's working, what's not, like outside of the act of intimacy. And knowing those points for yourself of what works for you guys, what doesn't work, and how much you want it, and how much you maybe desire to try things, like all of the stuff that deals with the act itself can be really helpful to know.
Yeah, totally. And I think we've probably talked about this before, but I think it's really important to reiterate that there is no perfect or healthy amount of times to be having sex in a week or a month. It is so individual, and it's going to depend massively on where you're at. For some people, that might be once a day. For some people, it will be once a month. For some people, it will be once every few months. Truthfully, there is no right or wrong. There is no healthy amount. It's what feels good to you and what feels good to your partner, so that you can maintain that connection and so that you can maintain that intimacy and romance in the relationship, so that you're not moving into that more roommate, best friend, living together, but maybe a little bit disconnected phase of the relationship. So figure out for you. I know in my last relationship, I knew the amount of time that was the longest we could go without sex before the cracks started to come in the relationship, before the disconnect would happen. And then
Right.
we'd have to intentionally, after that time had passed, it would require a very conscious effort from both of us to really reconnect and then get back into the rhythm with intimacy again. So that would be what I would encourage, is have a little experiment between you and a partner. What is that length of time? Is it 2 days? Is it 2 weeks? Is it 2 months? Is it 6 months? What is it for you? And just have that as a priority to maintain the connection in some way, so you can focus on the intimacy and relationship and pleasure, connection, love, all of it. We love it.
Yes. So good. I hope this was helpful and illuminating and supportive to your journey with sex and intimacy, helping you see things maybe perhaps a different way or giving you little answers or guidance in something that you're grappling with or thinking over or chewing on.
Yeah, if you've loved this episode, how about sharing it with a friend that could get value? Maybe you've been having conversations recently. We would love if you share this. And also, we would love you even more than we already do if you can make sure that you follow us, subscribe on the podcast platforms, and leave us a review and a rating. That would be absolutely incredible. We appreciate you. We thank you. And we're excited to see you in the next Pleasure Playbook.
Bye. See you next time.